Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Stephen Millard. I'm the Deputy Director here at NISA for Macroeconomic Modelling and Forecasting. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be hosting this event. I can't even begin to express my sadness at what is going on in Ukraine at the moment. Like all of us, I think we can just hope that the situation ends as soon as possible and that we can get on with the important task of rebuilding Ukraine. And that's what we're going to hear all about today. We are very, very privileged here at NISA to welcome three members of the Ukrainian Economic Reconstruction Council. Dmytro Nataluka, who's also a Ukrainian MP and chair of the Parliamentary Committee for the Economy, is that right? With him we have Gleb Buryak and Vladislav Davidov, both advisors to the Ukrainian Parliament. They're going to present their work on reconstruction in Ukraine. Alexander Pivovarsky from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, who's also a Ukrainian, will be responding to that. But before we have any of that, our very own Patricia Sanchez Juanino is going to present some of our work here at NISA on the impact of the war. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Patricia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Sanchez, and today I will briefly tell you about what we did last year. I hope that they are listening. The work that we did last year around March about the modeling of the cost of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. This work was done by my colleagues Yana Liatze, Corrado Macarielli, Paul Multiverly, and me. When we did this analysis, all the estimation that we did of the assessment, all the estimates that we did were based on the assessment of the conflict of the assessment of the situation in the light of how the conflict was evolving at that time, because this work was firstly done in March, but then we estimated our work in May. And today I will show you just the results we have in May. But both papers and both data is available upon request for anyone who wanted. So when we were doing the analysis, we thought that the effects of the conflict will mainly arise from the trade restrictions, especially in light of the sanctions imposed to Russia, and also the disruption of the supply chain. Also, we thought that the effects will come from the higher inflation, especially in higher energy and food prices, given that Ukraine and Russia are significant food and energy exporters in the world economy. We also thought that the effects will come in the increases in the public expenditure, in defense and in the households, also related to the rises to the policy rates. And also some effects will come from the inflows of migration from Ukraine. And we were aware that some economies were still recovering from the COVID cloud at that moment. So once we did the analysis, then we took our National Institute Global Economic Model that we call NIGEM. That this is our trade-linked global economic model, and it's covered like around 60 countries and regions. We use this model for produce our forecast that we are finishing this month, and we do quarterly forecast, and we are finishing this month ours, and we use as well for this kind of simulation. So in this case, for this conflict simulation, we assume all these, we take into account all these assumptions that are here listed. So first of all, we imposed a reduction in the domestic demand at 10% in Russia and 45% in Ukraine. We increased some of the world commodity prices, like for example, we increased oil prices in 30%. We also raised the investment premium in Russia, in Ukraine and some European economies. We increased the government consumption in European economies. I think for the, if I don't remember wrongly, for the neighboring economies, we increased 1% of the GDP, and for the non-neighboring, 0.5% of the GDP, similar to the US. We also reduced the population in Ukraine by 4.6 million. We declined the trade for Ukraine in 80% and for Russia in 50%. And we also increased the non-commodity import prices for Russia. And finally, the last assumption that we took is we raise the interest rate in Russia by 7 percentage points. So given these assumptions, the results of what we obtained in terms of the output, we estimated that the conflict will reduce the global GDP about 1% relative to a pre-war baseline. So you can see there in our chart, this is in 2023. And this 1% is around 1.5 trillion in percentage parity terms. Also, you can see, you can appreciate in the chart that Europe is one of the regions most affected, mainly because its proximity to the conflict and its dependence on the food and energy supplies. In terms of Russia, we estimated that the Russian GDP will be contracted around 10% in 2023. And we also estimated 2022, but we already have passed that time. And in terms of Ukraine, we were estimating similar to what the National Bank of Ukraine estimated in their last forecast for their economy, and it's around 30% of their GDP in 2022. If we move to the inflation, the news are also bad. Given that Ukraine and Russia are significant exporters for the global economy, and especially Russia is one of the largest oil exporter and oil producer and energy exporter, we estimated that the conflict will lead in higher energy prices and food prices, and this will adapt to an already inflationary pressures that are already in the global economy. In terms of the advanced country world, the inflation will rise up further, and in our assumption or in our model, we saw that we assume that the monetary policy will react strongly to this rise. In terms of the emerging economies, given that in emerging economies, the CPI basket, the food in the CPI basket, the share of the food in the CPI basket is larger, higher food prices also will lead in higher inflation for that economy. So just to sum up, as I said, if anyone wants to see the reports are available, we estimated that the conflict will highly hit the global economy, especially through higher commodity prices, weaker confidence, and this increased geopolitical uncertainty. We are aware that the duration of the economy, of the war and the economic effects are still uncertain. So this global estimate that we have here could be much larger than we have estimated. And also the war is expected to shrink the Ukrainian economy. So we think that it's crucial that the rest of the world supports its reconstruction and supports it with a huge financial aid. And here you have the links for the references, and that's mainly.
I'm going to hand over to Luke. Well.
Good now. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and thank Jagjit and the Fantastic Institute for this incredible opportunity. My name is Dmitry Nataluk. I'm the chairman of the Economic Committee of the Parliament of Ukraine. And besides being the guy who is unlucky to be in charge of the economics during wartime in the parliament, I am also a politician in the first place. And that obliges me to communicate with the people during this war and to make understandable the policies, the intentions, and the vision that we have in terms of the future of the country once everything ends. And we hope that will be very, very soon. For this reason, when the president of Ukraine asks what kind of country are we building once everything is over, you think of it as a very simple question, but then if you give it a bit more of a thought, it becomes really complex. Now, we think we have an answer to that question, the three of us. And I will just tell you a very brief history of how that answer was born. For the simplicity of calculations, for the sake of simplicity of calculations, imagine you have an economy that is worth 100 pounds, and then it falls by 50%, and it's worth 50 pounds, and it grows by 50%, and it's worth only 75 pounds. We discussed this yesterday. So this shows how the speed of the recovery of growth is crucial, is paramount, and it should be at least twice as fast as the speed of the decline. Now, that is an incredible challenge. As the Red Queen in Lewis Carroll has put it, right? We must run as fast as we can just to stay in place. And if you wish to go anywhere, you must run twice as fast as that. This is precisely the Ukrainian situation, unfortunately. And that is why this concept of a fast state has been born. A state that does everything in an incredibly accelerated manner, where speed and the velocity is paramount. Now, what we want is to basically take this idea and this concept and to put it on the three main pillars. Pillar number one is the intensity of transactions. We have some capital in the system, not much left, and even less so in the upcoming year, unfortunately. And we will rely heavily on loans and on credits, obviously. But we want those money that are already in the system to circulate as fast as possible, to take part in as much transactions as possible, in order to make the system work in a very fast and efficient way and not spoil any time or any money. So basically what we want to do in very primitive terms, we want any banknote to participate in as much transactions as possible within a year, so that the system heats up itself and we have to rely less and less on foreign influxes of capital for stimulating the growth. Now, how are we going to do that? And the idea is to reduce transactional expenses. And this is the second pillar. What is a transactional expense? Corruption is a transactional expense. Poor tax system is a transactional expense. Poor legal system, slow customs. Everything that tears down or slows down any business, any bottleneck, is a transactional expense. Non-digitalized registers, cash economy. So in a way, what we are thinking is that we have to rethink the whole model of how Ukraine used to work, being a very slow state before the war, and how to make all that disappear and give birth to a very new system. A system that creates an environment of the permissionless innovation, and that is the third pillar. So we want to give as much freedom of economy, of access, and by access I mean digital versus material, of movement, of capital, of information, and so on and so forth. So our answer to the question of what country are we building once the war ends is we are trying to build one of the fastest country on the continent. We think that what matters is not ideology in our situation. What matters is the impact. And with this concept, we want to produce as much impact as possible to get Ukraine recovering in the fastest way possible. Because when you are at war, time is really paramount, and market instruments do not work well, unfortunately. The problem is, however, that when this war will end, when the guns will go silent, there's going to be another war. War for people to get them back home, work for workplaces to create new workplaces. And we will be at war with time, because if Ukraine doesn't make it in time to create enough workplaces and to employ the people that want to come back in 6 months, a year, they will all go and find their jobs elsewhere. So for that reason, time is paramount in this concept, and I think that I will let Vlad and Gleb to develop a bit further in details on the very idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitro. Hello, everyone. I would like to
say thank you for this great opportunity to talk to you today. So I am absolutely sure that all of you are aware about the recent events in Ukraine. But I think that we need to start with the numbers as a starting point for our presentation. So it's really hard to calculate the exact losses of Ukraine's economy because the war is going on. It is impossible to reach occupied territories of Ukraine, but the recent numbers shows us that Ukraine lost about $565 billion because of Russia's aggression. So here we are talking not only about direct losses, but also different indirect losses like budget losses, postponed investments, and so on. So let's look at numbers. Residential buildings suffered the most because of Russia's aggression. Now about 6,000 different buildings, houses are destroyed by Russians. We need after the war to reconstruct and rebuild about 14 million square meters residential areas. So this is the most common situation while talking about direct losses. Also, Ukrainian infrastructure suffered well. Bridges, roads, different energy facilities, and so on. Commercial sector suffered mostly indirect losses. We are talking about lost profit, we are talking about different lost investments, and so on. So together, large-scale enterprises like industrial sector, agricultural sector, different commercial services, they lost together more than 77 billion in indirect losses. So only indirect losses. So while preparing this presentation, we try to outline the pros and cons of modern Ukrainian economy, different specifics of Ukrainian economy. So let's talk about Ukraine strengths. So probably the most important while talking about Ukraine, it's Ukrainian speed. Because at the first glance, Ukraine seems to be corrupt, weak state, really lacking some sort of capacity. But war showed that, to be honest, Ukraine is not lacking capacity. Ukraine actually is extremely flexible state. So flexible in terms of its opportunity to react, to deal with different challenges. And here we are not talking about state itself. We are talking also about commercial sphere. We are talking about different educational spheres and so on. Ukraine's location is also important, especially while we are talking about Euro integrational activities of Ukraine. So Ukraine's location gives its opportunity to be something like a window for foreign investors to join both European markets, to join some Asian markets, and so on. This is a great opportunity to export well, to import well, to deal in other countries, and so on. And of course, Ukraine infrastructure will create a specific demand. So we need to restore energy facilities, we need to rebuild houses, roads, and so on. So that's why after the war, just after the war, Ukraine will show some sort of growth because of the higher demand. Of course, everyone knows the weakest points of Ukraine's economy. So Ukraine is lacking capital really much, together with a well-known problem of different regulatory barriers, doing business problems, some sort of pressure, just like, once again, corruption and so on. There are also modern problems because Ukraine lost not only 30% of GDP, like Patricia said, Ukraine lost about 7 million people who are right now staying abroad, who are out of the Ukraine's economy, and it will be another challenge just after the war to bring them back. At the same time, I don't want actually right now to be cynical, but every crisis seems to be some sort of opportunity to build back better. I'll give you one clear example. Have you heard about Azov Steel plant in Mariupol? So this is really important place. The highest infrastructure or industrial facility in Ukraine. So 2 years ago, while talking with its management together with Dmitro, they presented us their strategy about modernization of this enterprise. So it could take about 10 years, billions of dollars to make it some sort of modern, high-tech, green, high-tech and green enterprise. Now it is absolutely destroyed. Of course, it's a strategy, but it's an opportunity using, of course, different funds, using reparations and so on to build back this factory better and to avoid this long process of modernization. And this is some sort of structural adjustment that our economy needs. And while talking about threats, we need to understand that Russia probably will be existing. So short-term and long-term period. So there is still threat to Ukraine's economy. There is still some sort of unpredictability that we need to deal with. So now let's take a brief look on key barriers to investors. So both strategic and portfolio investors are facing the most common problem: corruption, different problems in judicial system, monopolization, and problems with unstable, sometimes inflexible, sometimes too flexible Ukrainian law system. This is the main problem, that the bigger governmental body is, the more problem it brings to the economy, to the investor, to the business. At the same time, so while talking about migration, I mentioned that 7 million people fled from Ukraine because of the war. And this is some sort of referendum on how Ukraine will look like after the war. So while talking about Ukraine, while talking about pros and cons of living abroad, about talking about disadvantages and advantages of Ukraine and European states mostly, Ukrainians are absolutely sure that the level of digitalization, both in governmental sector, both in commercial sector, is the case benefit. And now our main goal to take this benefit, to take the most strong point, and just to spread it all over the country, all over the industries of Ukraine's economy, to make Ukraine as fast as we can, because this is our main point. So I'll try to be brief, but comprehensive. Our first task is to deal with the small one. We are talking about small and medium enterprises. So Ukraine, as a post-Soviet state, faced the shortage of small and medium enterprises. Of course, we understand that they are important, first of all, because they are working with large-scale enterprises. They are working with huge businesses. They're providing them with different details, different services, and so on. But it's also a great opportunity to deal with some social problems, because one small or medium enterprise is at least one middle-class household. This is the way how to bring Ukrainians back home. This is the way how to deal with social problems, salaries, and so on. So our main task is to increase the number of small and medium enterprises by reducing barriers to their operation. Let's look in details. Here's just typical scheme about how Ukrainian business, how doing business in Ukraine. So you need to face at least 6 times with the government while doing your everyday job. You need, nevertheless, you're a small one, you're the big one, medium one, and so on. So while starting a business, you need to fill papers, you need sometimes to pay some sort of bribe, you need sometimes to ask different specialists to help you. So now the situation is different because this part is almost digitalized. But let's go further to equipment installation. For example, you're going to create drones. Typical situation in Ukraine. So you need your equipment to be checked by fire workers, rescue services, sometimes by different export control services, and so on. So you need to ask to postpone some fines. You need to sometimes give a bribe to get a license, and so on. Then, while talking or dealing with custom services, of course, you'll face different delays. You will face problems with dual export permissions, with different custom officers, and so on. While filling contracts, you should be patient enough. You need to check every details, because each time you can be fined because of some misunderstanding. And accounting is another problem in Ukraine, because it takes at least twice longer to pay taxes in Ukraine than, for example, in Poland. It takes 10 times longer to pay taxes in Ukraine than in Estonia. Our main goal is to digitalize this process as much as we can. So you don't need to attain fire workers or different permission system officers to install equipment. You just need to pay insurance. So no bribes, but you'll be safer because of this insurance. You don't need to talk to a custom officer. You don't need to deal with him when there is automatic system of customer services. You don't need to spend 300 hours a year for accounting when the system prepares these forms for you. This is our main goal while talking about what we call one-click business. So everything can be in smartphone, because as our president said, there's no corruption in smartphone. It's much easier, it's comprehensive enough, and you can deal with every governmental body by using your phone. No corruption, fast system, fast circulation of money, easy business, and that's another solution. Now let's talk about large scale business. Can you look at this number? 15% of Ukrainian export is high technology export, only 15%. And this is the main point. This is the starting point of Ukrainian corruption. This is the starting point of Ukrainian economy problems. This is why Ukrainian economy almost collapsed in 2015 because of commodity prices. This is the probably the weakest point of Ukrainian state system. And in order to make Ukraine more attractive, in order to make Ukrainian economy stronger, we need to cooperate well. We need to make it secure. We need to make secure supply chains and so on, but not using autarky as a sort of solution making, but to use cooperation as our the most strong point. While talking about open strategic economy, we are talking about EU's strategy to cooperate within specific programs. We made a research on key industries in European industrial strategy. So there are 9 of them, for example, batteries, for example, drones, 3D printing, and so on. And Ukraine actually mentioned in this open strategic autonomy strategy as a country that provides only raw materials for the European Union. Our main goal is to cooperate well. In 2014, Ukrainian economist, Georgian Ukrainian economist, Kaha Bendukidze, actually described the goal. 50% of EU's import from China is based in Ukraine. So Ukraine can be another manufacturing factory of Europe. Ukraine can be another source for diversification of European investments, on collaboration in strategic spheres, and so on. Our research shows that almost half of strategic priority spheres of EU's economy, they can be, Ukraine can be important in those spheres. Ukraine can provide something from raw materials to assembling to different parts and so on. Now let's talk a little bit about numbers. So our short-term goal is to replace the weakest point of international trade system. I'm talking about Russia and Belarus. So after the war, it will be still risky enough to cooperate with Russia, to cooperate with Belarusian companies, and so on. Our idea to fill this gap in European imports, because it's also brings additional inflation, it brings additional problems to EU's economy, the economy of the Western countries, by allocating, by opening these businesses in Ukraine. We are talking about 35 billions of potential export and potential demand on the Ukrainian market by replacing Russian and Belarusian products. And here is, we don't need donations on this topic. We need just to find the way how to secure investments. It will take about 10 years and 90 billions of investments to build 570 enterprises in Ukraine in the most strategic spheres. So grain processing, wood processing, glass manufacturing, different automotive industries, and so on. This will be another source of security for Ukraine's economy, because as Dmytro once said, you have your skin in this game. And this is the way how to make sure that Ukraine still will be a part of the international trade system. This is the way how to modernize Ukraine trade system and economy as well. So by using no donations, by using investments. And the main source of the confidence in this sphere is guarantees. Of course, we need guarantees to attract investments in strategic spheres. We are talking about portfolio guarantees, we are talking about using different development banks, industrial parks, and so on. But this number will bring additional 5% of GDP to Ukraine, unprecedented growth in Ukraine's history. So maybe now I'll give the floor to my colleague, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and very thankful for your invitation. And Vlad, thank you for passing me the floor. So when we say about fast state, we believe it should be a human-centric economy. No matter how digitalized and complex it is, it will only work if people are in the center of the of all the processes. So it does start with the education, and you can see the current state of affairs that Ukraine is suffering from. We did have the Human Development Index in decline prior to war situation. We had weak property rights, and of course, something that Ukrainian development is unfortunately widely known is the level of corruption that I will not concentrate on. And we even had the Gini index declined. So we were part of that global problem of inequality. And even with no matter how bad it is, the socialistic heritage of the Soviet Union, but it did provide some proper equality of distribution of capital. And even there, we were losing the idea of the human-centric state where people want to live, work, and where people want to return. Kriv here made a very grim, but unfortunately very correct forecast on decline of population in Ukraine. So you can see that after the full-scale invasion, there are over, Vlad said 7 million people. Yeah, 7 million people. I think this is the numbers that were checked before the destruction of energy infrastructure, where even more people fled from Ukraine. And you see that over 20% of those people, they are not planning to return. They found their place in Europe or in other states. And mostly those are skilled workers who definitely know how to fit into modern economy, how to find their place. And in a way, we're happy for our former fellow citizens. But if we want to make our economy, our country work, we need those people back. We need to be open for skilled migration. And we need to make use of those people who are still in Ukraine, who are not planning to leave, and to motivate people to come back. There is a very poor situation with employment in Ukraine, not in terms of employment as a macroeconomic indicator, of employment as a process. It's quite difficult to hire a person. So definitely, even if you have an open enterprise and you are looking for workers, it takes a lot of time and effort to find proper people who will fit into your company. Moreover, you have issues with paying legal paycheck to those people because of additional taxation, which is also an issue. What we suggest to do, we believe that as one of the landmarks of the fast state and one of the goals of this techno-human-centric utopia we want to create in Ukraine is to automate the employment sector and employment function as much as possible. And we believe that state can do that and can start developing that right now. So first of all, we need to create a governmental body as a platform, not as an institution, but as a platform that will unite four entities. Those are people who are looking for the work, the employers who provide the work, and companies that will provide services of these people to connect. And in case they fail to connect due to the lack of skills, expertise, knowledge, there definitely should be options to educate those people, the edutech companies. You may say that all those institutions, they're already there and they work and they should perform on the market basis, but unfortunately they do not, because there is lack of circulation of information. Just there is no data that there is somewhere is a skilled IT engineer that wants to work in my company, just because he doesn't know that. And government can't help me, because definitely we have some state service that provides services of employment, where we can address if you're looking for the job, but this is very 19th century approach that requires some update. So we believe that this government should be a platform that connects all the data, all the information, and provides an API for private companies to receive that information, process and connect the dots. And moreover, this should be done on the competitive basis. So those HR companies scheming the governmental data processed in real time, which is also important, or at least in the daily update of the information, should make the best fit, and they should compete for this transaction of employment. And the educational companies also should be very prompt to react to the needs of the market, because no matter how great are the universities and institutions, I believe even in such a developed country with the best institution in the world as the United Kingdom, you may also feel some lag of what the market needs and what universities provide. So definitely you need to leave some room for private companies who will be much more flexible. So in a way, the idea of the fast state is for private companies to provide services for the government with the supervision of the government, but with the speed of the private company. Here you can see the data of perception of governmental institutions. So traditionally, yes, our points of pain are customs, courts, and in Ukraine, it's a healthcare. That's, again, it can be explained by the socialistic heritage, where people paid right for proper healthcare attention, and this institution keeps on going over and over. But definitely you see that there is a very positive, bright example of administrative service center. The institution that first appeared, if I'm not mistaken, in 2016, right? So in 2016, that was the service center, digitalized service center, where you could address for some licenses, registrations, without the need to file a lot of documents and stand in just enormous queues and getting a bunch of signatures just for nothing, the wasted signatures that would just provide the work time for some governmental employees that are not needed at all. So experience of those administrative state centers was very positive in Ukraine, was highly regarded, and they keep on developing and growing in numbers as they used to be developing and growing in numbers prior to full-scale invasion. And they received a very positive perception of Ukrainians. And the slide just serves to explain that digitalization has already started and it brought positive results. And now we just need to fuel those things up. The worst about this slide is the number of regulatory bodies in Ukraine. That is 2,000 regulatory bodies, 2,000 minor institutions that will provide you some kind of licenses. Most of them are just the provision of public office labor work. And most of them, they can be easily switched for some not very complex, mostly simple digital solutions. So there is a very positively treated application of governmental state services called DIA. Maybe some of you have already heard about that. The good thing is that other governments, seeing the positive results of DIA, they are feeling quite envy about Ukrainian success in digitalization. They applied the same solution with the same engine, same code. Specifically, yes, the same application they applied in their countries, which were considered much more developed and definitely less corrupt than Ukraine. So our goal is to implement the same approach, digital approach to state services, to all the possible institutions, and to fuel private business development. What we need to target, we do need to target, as we see from the previous slide, customs and courts, because you need to be integrated into global economy. You need to be integrated into proper transfer of goods. And moreover, you need to have the property rights protected, which is the issue with the Ukrainian judicial system. If you can automate it as much as you can, you should definitely go forward to that, because you can either develop the property rights the same way as Western world did, but you started doing that in 19th century, in 9th century. We have a long road to walk here. So unless we build this proper social institution, maybe we just should get rid of that and sell it to the computers. Talking about speed. Well, our first idea about the velocity of money came from the something you well know of, the quantitative easing, right? And as inflationary results that we witness here globally. And we thought, what if we won't increase the money volume? What if we increase the velocity speed, reaching the same amount of money, servicing the aggregate output of economy? You can say that the quantitative equation won't change, because again, money, velocity equals price, quantity. And if you increase money or velocity, it's not necessarily the Q that rises. It can also be the level of prices. However, speed is all about efficiency. In a way, we can put the equal sign to these two indicators, speed and efficiency. And what is efficiency in distribution of money is more or less equal distribution where the economy does need those money. As generally in every economy, there is a problem of velocity. So for example, if you compare speed of money velocity in United States, that's traditionally like 1.2, 1.4, which is considered like an average amount of circulation. Economy like Poland, which is a very vitally growing and developing economy, I should say, the velocity is closer to 2. And in France, again, highly developed economy, in France, the velocity of money is less than 1. So each euro in France circulates a bit less than once in the economy. Well, for example, in Sierra Leone, the circulation is 4, but you can explain that due to the lack of money volume in Sierra Leone, which is just because they don't have the paper money, and that's why they use the natural exchange and the barter. So the idea is that the higher is the circulation of money, the higher is the efficiency and the possibility that money will reach the place they are needed the most. And so in this general equilibrium, macroeconomic equilibrium, where we don't want to go, well, we don't want to increase prices. We don't want to grow on the expense of nominal GDP. We want to grow on the expense of the real GDP, and proper distribution will move the curves to the right, to the real GDP, keeping the price level at the same ground, which is our goal. So this slide might look promising and good, but we didn't know how to show that as a bad economy, as the slow economy with hurdles at every stage. Well, definitely economy is a living entity, right? It's like an alive body, and you can't grow unless you do some other things on the background. So as we target economic growth, well, prior to economic growth, you need to develop markets. And prior to development of markets, you need to have efficient economy, you need to have factors of production. And to have factors of production, you need some people who will use it and who will create the factors of production. So we do believe that, again, as a human-centric economy, everything starts with the human capital. And to build a resilient, fast state, you need to start from the people. You need people to be educated, professional, and at least knowing how they will live in this 21st century economy, doing something new. So at each stage of transfer, so human capital, building the factors of production that will result in development of industries, markets, that would result in economic growth that will launch the spiral and develop human capital even further, right? So there is a gap. Yeah. And we believe that solving these gaps, these hurdles, you will increase the speed. So the idea is to decrease the distance between these entities, I can say, between these parts. So as human capital will develop faster, the faster will be the factors of production, and they might also stumble on some organizational issues or some lack of investment or poor international market relations. So, for example, concerning Ukraine, we have quite outdated education system. I should admit I am an educator, and I can say yes. And we have issues with that, right? So somehow we need to improve the speed of that. With the factors of production, prior to full-scale invasion, Ukraine was the least efficient country in the world in terms of energy consumption. 18% of GDP went to burn fuel, with the average number of 9 to 10% globally. So even reaching just the average global number, not just the developed states, just any state, Colombia, Central Africa, and other states, that will relieve over 10% of GDP for investment, right? So you can say that why won't we solve our issues on our own before asking for money? And this is exactly what we want to do. We want to solve those issues. And so again, it doesn't look like, but it's a bad economy. And here is how a good economy, the fast state, should look like. Yes, it does look like an economy on drugs, but But the idea is, if you squeeze the distance between the points, the economy will develop much faster and more efficient, and the level of growth will definitely be fast enough to provide what we need for reconstruction and to be the equal part of the global community, not to be some burden, a money wasting pot where all the countries will just bring money, but to be an equal partner and to be the example, maybe the sandbox or the playground where you can implement governmental practices that will result in development of other global partners Ukraine has. So this results in two types of goals that we have in the fast state development. So the short-term goals are obviously influenced by the war happening in Ukraine. So we need to settle relocation of enterprises for them to provide employment to work efficiently. We do need to make the audit, the inspection of the state services that will provide that are a subject of acceleration in their services. Again, we did make some in terms of, for example, of Bureau of Labor Statistics or customs or judiciary services, but definitely there are much more, a lot of them. We need to continue the digitalization and provide digital taxation and customs. We do need to allocate strategic investors to Ukraine and provide to them proper opportunities to interact with Ukrainian business in a way of tax-free zone, like industrial parks. Metro is the author of industrial parks legislation. We should remember that. And in a long term, well, we need to reform the pension fund. We need to provide a grant system, not in a socialistic way, to provide grant system for development of, again, of the human capital and the strategic areas of country's economy. We need to develop, we can't just implement the ideology of industrial parks or tax-free systems. We need to integrate that into the global international framework to become part of the global supply chain and to respond in a very prompt and a fast way, which specific industries we do need to develop. But it takes a long time to build a wind turbine plant, and when you finish doing that, it might be an obsolete technology. For example, if they implement that, finally they will make the nuclear fusion, who will need the wind turbines, correct? But the general idea is the automation of the bureaucracy. And we believe the automation of the bureaucracy is not only the solution to corruption, but this is also the reveal of personal freedom of Ukrainians, because this is the work that people do that they hate, and people who interact with those people, they're also definitely not really happy. And all this time it can be spent on economic development or arts or whatever. Prior to these goals, right, so short-term and long-term objectives, we expect that on the stabilization phase, we can reach the GDP growth of +2 or 3%, which is nothing in terms of Ukrainian situation right now, but at least we need to provide some stable ground for further development. You can do that with the tasks mentioned in the previous slide, but definitely integration into global international trade with experts, business relocation, and regulatory barriers. Where we can have the fast state level rate of growth is on the recovery phase, and we assume that's a harsh assumption, right? But we do believe that after such a breakdown Ukraine had, losing over 30 to 50% of GDP, I won't give you the exact calculations because there are no calculations you can rely on 100%. But we do need to create the environment with a level of growth prior to 10%. And as we know, after the World War II reconstruction, those were very obvious and real levels of growth. And how you do that? again, labor productivity, efficiency, proper integration into global capital with the foreign direct investment, which can be allocated with the proper property rights protection, like civilized property rights protection. How we do that? So there are 4 missions on this way as our spiral of growth consists of 4 blocks: human capital, factors of production, industries, markets, and economic growth. We consider those 4 blocks being each mission, and each mission, it has its own targets. So how do you develop human capital? Definitely you need institutional protection for people. Why would people want to return back to Ukraine? They will feel safety. They will finally feel as owners, because again, development of property rights is not just a legal problem. In a way, it's a social problem, because Ukrainians are just learning to be the owners of something, not only the land, but of the capital, of innovations, of anything. Then, of course, education. Everything starts with education, and education must be more responsive to the society and to the economy. As of today, Ukraine having, I still believe, a very highly developed and competitive technical skill education. We do have IT engineers all over the world, and people with Ukrainian surnames working in international global companies in terms of IT engineering. But we do need to push social sciences and economy that I'm teaching. Yeah, we do need to provide the proper medicine, again, by the development of private sector. And we believe to automate the labor market so that people will fit into economy. They will feel needed, and they will provide the added value to what they do, to the economy operating. Same approach can be applied to all the other points. So to improve factors of production, you do need fast customs, infrastructure. With the development of industries and markets, you need to provide some proper strategy, a proper strategy of integration, and we believe that open strategic autonomy is the way to do that. And to ensure long-term and continuous economic growth as a mission, well, you do need the governmental support in development of human capital, having some targeted funds. You need to unify the digital system, possibly to create some kind of larger scale automation that will be the competitive to NISA, making some macroeconomic models. And possibly you need to expand the concept of capital, because prior to the invasion, we had a problem, for example, in private business. When a company is buying the other company, you have the balance price of the business, but you don't have the price of human capital working in that company. So what if you buy a company and all chief engineers would just leave it and create something else? Well, you could bind them with some legal obligations, but why won't you move the idea of the capital further and quantify the human capital in terms of financials? And this is a very large scale goal, and maybe we will discuss it on some other classes and presentations or seminars. But this is the way where we should look. We should look not onto just the renovation, we should look also onto global development and to look where the world goes and go with it. So thank you very much. And yes.
I'm now very worried that probably somewhat complementary to what was already said by colleagues from Ukraine. We actually, just a few weeks ago, we published a chapter in the book, CEPR book on reconstructing Ukraine. There's, as you know, there's quite a lot going on, and it's, I think, very good that there's so much thinking going on about what's the future of Ukraine and how we could help. So my colleague Ralph De Haas, who is our head of research, and I, together with a lot of colleagues around the EBRD, looked into the financial sector and how it can support recovery of Ukraine. And basically, as already was mentioned, it is really, we need to think about how we would mobilize local and foreign savings and channel them effectively into investment projects, but also how we channel significant financial support that will come from official channels and some different forms of assistance. And we had more recently done more thinking, because we're also thinking about the need for war insurance. It was actually mentioned in the presentation that it will be one of the priorities for the future, in particular if Russia will not will be still flexing its muscle, so to speak, and there will be some uncertainty about the truce. And we counted backwards and to estimate the amount of investment needed to bring Ukrainian GDP to about 2/3 of average EU level within 10-15 years, so that Ukraine can become an EU member state at that time, around that time, or maybe at somewhere around that time, at the level of GDP that was at the time of recent entrance. And we estimate that the amount required would be in net present terms at around 500 billion euros. So it's a very big amount. And so the question is how it will be intermediated. What will happen with the financial sector? And so here we think about the challenges of speed, scale, and also stability. Because the previous bouts of accelerations, including in Ukraine, by the way, of financial acceleration that led, unfortunately, to instability, the worst being 2008 crisis. So Ukrainians are a bit wary of these type of accelerations. Just a few words about the state of play before the war. So Ukraine's banking system was actually quite small compared to other emerging economies. So private sector loans to GDP were at around 28%, which is very low. And maybe it's not necessarily a tragedy, given that today we'll have a big recovery and completely new economy. However, it raises some questions about the state of the sector. It was quite successfully overhauled after 2014, and the colleagues who spoke earlier, they alluded to it, that there were significant reforms in the financial sector supervision and monetary policy. And in fact, it is the main reason why, in our view, at least, that why financial sector was so resilient during the war. There were virtually no collapses of banks, but there were a lot of changes, and the largest bank was nationalized. And as you see in the second graph, the largest banks today are all in state hands. And that was not the case until 2014 or 2008. So there was this sort of gradual process of nationalizations because of crises and political crises. So non-financial sector is even smaller, very limited insurance market and very small capital market. So there's also, before the 2014, there was a lot of connected lending. And there was a very large increase in NPL. So it actually was quite dramatic, as you could see. It went above 50% of all the stock of the loans. Since 2014, there were, apart from the improvements in monetary policy management and supervision, there were various efforts to try to simplify NPL resolutions, that kind of like reduce indeed the transaction cost in the economy. And together with the other colleagues at EBRD who work in legal reforms, there was one approach developed called Kiev approach to out-of-court settlements. And it has been working with vis-a-vis private banks, less so with the state banks. Here, it's a quick chart on the state of the capital market. So in my own team, we track the capital markets development, and we developed an index, financial markets development index. And you could see here in this little chart how Ukraine looks compared to advanced market economies that are on the outside, and then other emerging market benchmarks, so around the world, and how Ukraine looks compared to its own region, what we considered previously its own region, Eastern Europe and Caucasus. Although today, of course, one could argue that that region is changing, but nevertheless, it shows that apart from macroeconomic environment, which was actually pretty good before the war, and some capital market infrastructure, but with its own problems, but there was an improvement in infrastructure. There was generally very small capital markets. So as I already said, the system turned out to be quite resilient. The cleanup of 2014 paid off during the war, and the liquidity injection, supervisory forbearance, it helped to stabilize banks. There was unlimited deposit guarantee that was recently removed, but it was originally introduced to help improve confidence. However, private sector lending virtually stopped. So there is at the moment almost none. And capital markets were disrupted. No repo market, cross-border forex payments prohibited. Various instruments that were introduced before the war, they kind of had to cease for a while. And the government issued war bonds at sub-market rates, and that further disrupted the capital markets. Although, of course, it helped raise some funds, but it's a big challenge because basically there was a complete loss of monetary policy transmission in the system. And so, in our view, and that's based kind of on the broader survey of colleagues working on various aspects, and also, of course, working with partners in Ukraine. So there will be early on the need to clean up the financial system once again. And there's already preparation going on for asset quality review that needs to be kind of ready in terms of the design of terms of reference for when the moment comes sometime soon, when we hope the war ends, so that it doesn't need to be repeated again. There will be a need to think about resolution of NPLs and how that will affect the whole banking system. Would it be tied up in this NPL process and not be able to focus on new lending? And there will be a question of recapitalization. There will be fewer state banks, we hope, at the end. We believe that even though the state played a kind of important role in the economy during the war, there will be a need to ensure that the banks are commercially run, that the resources are targeted commercially in the future. And there will be a need in more market-based finance solutions that are not only banks. And in particular, as was mentioned already in the presentation, there is a significant decline in equity. So, as you destroy assets basically in the economy, first thing that gets wiped out is equity, not loans so much. And so basically there will be a need to generate new ways to provide equity to the economy, either it is through FDI or through local investors or some hybrid products. And the infrastructure for that was completely underdeveloped. So it will need to be accelerated early on. And there will be, it's an opportunity integration to European financial sector. And it was already proceeding in a way, both through the cross-border European banks that are active, that are about a quarter of the system, but also with the central bank actually pursuing formal process of EU integration in the financial sector. There are actually certain measures that could be taken that could facilitate integration before the formal EU membership. So there's such thing called regulatory alignment, where European institutions can judge Ukrainian supervision to be equivalent, and that makes it easier for European banks to deploy themselves in Ukraine. And then, of course, financial inclusion, there was a mention of SMEs, that were quite underfunded. I'm going to skip most of my slides because I don't want to dominate. We have not much time left, but I will just briefly mention. So resolution. On resolution, we believe that Ukraine should look at experiences outside even our region broadly of how resolution was successful. And we believe, for example, Korean experience in 1998, after its crisis, and the centralized solution of consolidating NPLs from different banks, and actually subsequently using those assets to launch capital markets. So Koreans were very successful at launching capital markets so they turned like a big disaster, and what they're still really traumatized by it and call it the IMF crisis, because the fact that they had to ask IMF to come back for them was unthinkable. But they turned that into opportunity and actually had the financial sector much more resilient at the end, and also launched the capital market and new instruments in the capital market. Then the topic of bank commercialization, privatization. Again, I won't go into this too much. It is possible that early on in transition, when good quality private investors may not simply be interested in Ukrainian banks, so only the unsavory ones may be interested, which happened before, So what may be needed is some form of hybrid solutions, maybe entry, or maybe running banks in trust, or some kind of other hybrid solutions. But most importantly, to make sure that there's commercial angle. Otherwise, a lot of money could be wasted. I already mentioned the European alignment, developing Ukrainian money markets. So as soon as possible, relaunching the flexible exchange rate and the inflation targeting, which was very successful. And now even today, I can tell you, when we work with other countries, we're now inviting Ukrainians who worked in the central bank during this time of transition. They are now viewed as experts and actually are helping other countries to transition to more flexible regimes and to inflation targeting. And then, as I mentioned already, capital markets development, there's quite a lot, you know, and I would say some form of hybrid product will be needed. There will be a need in consolidating capital markets infrastructure. Ukraine has almost no capital market, but actually has 4 exchanges, which shouldn't necessarily be the case. And there will be a need in developing war insurance instruments where we're trying to help. Financial inclusion, SMEs, as already mentioned, SME IPO funds. There are some EU examples and precedents that are reasonably successful that we should learn about. And focusing on financial stability, because if there is a kind of a bust again soon after beginning of recovery, it could delay very much Ukraine's recovery after the war, but also EU's integration. So we have much more in that book, you know, and the book is quite big. There are all the chapters. There's the chapters on various sectors, many of them mentioned in today's presentation. But I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me, and we look forward to the further discussion.
Thank you very much, Alex. Now, I appreciate we're running late, and I might need to run us to half past with the hope that's okay with people. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect questions. If you'd like to ask a question, state your name and affiliation, that would be good. Neil has a microphone. Do we have any questions? For any of the presentations? Okay, well, I have one, which is on the whole fast economy thing.
Okay, I've got the microphone. So yeah, my question about the fast economy is, are there any sort of examples of where something similar has happened in the past in other countries that you might be able to look to? Or I'm not going to use the phrase working this out on the hoof, but are you having to work through it and work it all out yourselves?
Perhaps you will add something more of it, but in my opinion, the approach should be in a way daring. Because to us, something like this war has never happened before. And the challenges we are facing now, we have never faced them. I mean, you can hardly imagine a country, perhaps the closest was the Second World War, with at least 30 up to 50% of the GDP destroyed, and so many people went out of the country. So in a way, I think that not just the war, forget the war, think about COVID. It has shown how important it is to be flexible and to become really fast. The R&D of vaccines, the distribution of vaccines, the testing, the distribution of testing, the decisions of the European Central Bank in terms of the distribution of the money. It was all about speed. And this indicates how the world entered in a different phase, where flexibility and velocity is paramount. A phase of, in some understanding, war against viruses, war against weather and climate, war against overpopulation, against some diseases and so on and so forth. So you need to adapt. You can't stay slow anymore. You need to be fast. And for that reason, we are, of course, collecting the best practices from all around the world. We're looking at Estonia very much right now in their digital decisions. We're looking at the UK, what you guys did during the Second World War and after the Second World War. We're looking all over the place, but we're also not afraid to propose something that we consider just to be common sense.
If I may. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for this question, because we are not ready for it. Yes. But having a time to think about it, actually, we're not introducing anything new, because we are not disrupting the state. We are not disrupting the government. We are just providing another organizational structure, because if we leave all the positive perception of presentation or anything. We are designing the governmental structure as an IT company with its processes, where you can input the processes through the APIs to provide a kind of a script. And this is what we are aiming at. And it does work in private companies, software companies that provide some lean approaches or anything. And partially it works in developed states. It works in Estonia, it works in Great Britain with digital services, it works with municipal companies. I've seen it working in Edinburgh, just on the city level. So we are in a situation where we can do brave solutions, and why not provide the overall approach with, of course, with human supervision. We're far from the idea that some script will change the government decision makers. But the idea is to automate all the routine processes that doesn't really require some thinking or decision making, what the government actors should do, but to get rid of all the routine that is mostly where inefficiencies and corruption are.
Thank you very much, Max Schulze, LSE. I was wondering, you make very ambitious policy suggestions for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. But I was wondering, in a society where, if I follow your presentations correctly, there's a deep-seated corruption, it's still a major policy problem, and there will be a very, very large extent of rent seeking. The question then is, how will you secure broad-based societal buy-in in what are fundamentally very far-reaching reformist agendas? So in other words, is there some thought already spent on how to compensate the losers, because they might mess it all up for you?
Yep.
Can you repeat the last sentence?
Down and you will have to find a way to bring those people who are now going to lose out on those that went back into the fold so that or would not undermine.
So yeah, this extremely, it's on, yeah. So this extremely nice question, because to be honest, I'm not sure that we have enough evidences of how rent-seeking countries managed to compensate those losers in the modern history. So there's no such examples. But so still, let's talk about origin of the Ukraine's rent-seeking economy. So I remember on my bachelor, I'm bachelor in political science. So I tried to research how Ukraine faced those problems with rent-seeking orientation, rent-seeking financial and political groups. And these roots lays in its privatization process back in 90s. So without a proper institutional freedom, with absolutely crony institutions back in 90s. So different groups managed to change Ukraine's orientation on a rent-seeking economy. So, and it seems to be, I'm not sure about my colleagues, but for me now, that there is no alternative to changing the main industries of Ukraine's economy. So that's why we are talking about strategic autonomy. We are talking about new high-tech innovational industries, 4.0 industries, because it's just the way how to change structure of the economy, to create new industries, to bring new horizons for investments, not just using agriculture, industrial sectors, metallurgy sector to get profits. And that's the only way how to, at the first glance, to demonopolize this market, this is the way how to bring new investments. That is why how to manage with the pressure of large scale players on the market. This is the way how to build the new activity into Ukraine's economy. And that is how probably the structure will change, and it will bring new horizons for fast game players. So it will attract additional demand on financial services, on the banks, bring additional industries to invest. And probably this is the answer that I can provide right now.
Thank you. Vlad did his paper, bachelor paper on precisely on rent sinking. So this I wanted him to introduce into this answer. So, in my opinion, there are 2 points. First point is pure evolution. We are acceding to the EU. The EU is very strict in terms of compliance, in terms of competition law, in terms of the regulation of the state monopolies. And if we really want to get there to become members, I'm afraid, like naturally, we will be left with no choice but to adopt those requirements, which is a good thing. That will strict and limit the appearances and the existence of future rent-seeking monopolies. The second point is that, in a way, the idea of this whole fast state narrative is to make the political leadership of our country to commit to it publicly, so that every time somebody passes a policy, the government, the parliament, or the president, the only question they should be asking themselves is, does this policy make our economy faster? Now, if you stick to that approach, then you will have to reform the anti-monopoly committee in such a way that it does not accept the existence of the cartels, of rent-seeking monopolies, and so on and so forth, because any such thing will slow down the specific sector in industry by taking down any competition in this sector. So in a way, if that is implemented, the fast state narrative is implemented, then the first thing you do, you reform the anti-monopoly committee, and anti-monopoly committee seeks to regulate the market in such a way that everybody has its stake in it, and it's free to operate for operation to any player. So that would be the answer.
Can I add to that one? So actually, it's a beautiful organizational question, because there is organizational routine. And I should say that firstly, corruption is not the ideal organization. Corruption institution is not the, well, even as the organization, it's not unified. And at the end of the day, no one wants to be a criminal. And when the rent-seeking officials, they get the opportunity to be integrated into the legal economy and be out of reach of anti-corrupt agencies, if they have this opportunity, they will switch to that. Then prior to 2014, there were, if I'm not mistaken, 450,000 officials, public officials in Ukraine. Right now, there are a bit more than 100,000. So I wouldn't call it an employment, but okay, the number of people engaged over 8 years was reduced for 4 times. So definitely there is a governmental direction in reduction of people involved in public office, leaving only the necessary ones. But at the end of the day, besides people don't wanting to be criminals, there should be some organizational push against these policies, and it will require the strict law and decision making from the highest level officials of Ukraine, together with, I guess, with support of European and Western American entities that will support those policies.
Thank you. Well, the bad news is I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring the discussion to a close, but the good news is there are some refreshments next door, so the discussions can continue. Let me take this opportunity to thank again all of our presenters, Patricia, Vlad, Dimitro, Alex, and Glib. And as I say, let's hope the conversations continue both in the refreshments next door in a minute and more longer term. You know, there's a discussion here to be had. There's a wonderful opportunity, I think, to build back better, to coin a phrase. And finally, I just hope you could all join me in thanking everyone in the usual way.